Hi, hello. So, I would like to share my struggle to get a doctor in Ontario, Canada. It is currently 2026, but I haven't had a doctor since about 2019. And before I start, this video is not a complaint about scarcity, though that is certainly a thing. I appreciate all of the overworked healthcare workers out there trying to do their best in an understaffed system. Instead, I want to explain how difficult it is for people like me to navigate this system in which you have no control over initiating the process, especially in a climate where radio silence and dismissal is the current going standard, at least from my experience. And on theme with all the other videos on my channel right now, where I'm exploring my pursuit of a diagnosis in neurodivergence and my self diagnosis, this will be explaining to others how the inability to communicate properly well, to navigate social structures manifests. Why is this, or has this been so hard for me? What does that look like? What does it look like for other people? Why why do we struggle so much? And this is me giving you the rundown. What points did I get caught up at? Why did I get caught up at them? And how does this overall affect my lived experience on the daily? So for full context, so that you have the history, everything that you need here to absorb the story and understand things from my perspective, I was born in Ontario. Although I moved away from my hometown as a young adult, I was still close enough to be able to travel back to my hometown should I need to see the family doctor that I'd had since birth. My original family doctor retired in the late 2010s, and his practice was taken over by a nice new young doctor whom I only ever met once to get a year's worth prescription of birth control because I was planning on traveling and living in another province for an undetermined amount of time. And that ended up being a very smart idea because as soon as I moved to BC at the end of 2019, the pandemic hit. Me and my partner spent 2 years in BC before moving back to our hometown, but while things were at their peak with shutdowns, I was contacted by my family doctor's receptionist. They asked me to detach from my doctor so that he could take on new local patients if I didn't know when I would be able to come back because of COVID-19. That request made complete logical sense to me, so I obliged. However, when I moved back to my hometown in Ontario those 2 years later, my old family doctor had no spots available, and them still seeing to my mother as one of their patients didn't entitle me to a spot at their practice anymore. When I went to the offices to ask if I could reattach, I was met with, well, the receptionist kind of balked at me. Like, she hit me with a cold, kind of incredulous, like, why would you think that? You disconnected from us. Like, I didn't only do so at their behest. And it's not like that's how family doctors have always worked where I'm from. But okay. Stupid question, I guess. At that time, and even up until now, I also couldn't attach to my common law spouse's family doctor, so I went on Healthcare Connect. I made a video a while back worrying over the inconsistent communication that I'd gotten from Healthcare Connect. I'd been on their list for years at that point, and their emails, which prompted confirmation, while also neglecting to be clear in what they wanted confirmed, stressed me out that I would accidentally be removed from the list. In those emails, though, they professed that everyone on the list who'd been so before the moment of the pledge in 2025 would be linked to a healthcare provider by spring of 2026. Come January 2026, I promptly received an email saying that they'd found me a doctor. Hooray! Right? I was given an address of the office that I'd been assigned to, but not the name of a practitioner. I assumed that there's more than one doctor in the building, and there very much is, so I didn't want to walk in and confuse the shit out of the wrong receptionist because I didn't have a name, so I just waited to be contacted again. And waited. The email that I'd received said they would reach out to me within a few weeks. I waited 2 months, and my partner started to get worried that if I didn't make contact, they might remove me from the patient list because I was being non-responsive. So I sucked up my anxiety, and I went to the offices directly to try and set up the aforementioned meet and greet with my new doctor. The office lobby was busy with patients, and there were at least a couple people in the reception area puttering around, so I went up to one when she was available and I told her my story, that I'd received an email from Healthcare Connect, that I'd been linked to their offices, but that I hadn't gotten any correspondence from them yet. I contextualized it too, so it didn't feel like I was just calling them slow or anything, because I don't have reliable calling on my phone. I had gotten a call from someone within the last few weeks, but there was no caller ID to tell me who, and no voicemail left. And so I told her if it was them, I didn't want to have missed it. I told her that I live in the boonies, reception is really bad, and I just wanted to make sure that they had my email and that that is highly preferable to get in contact with me. Truthfully, I just don't have calling on my phone plan because it's a needless expense, but all the other factors surrounding me make it basically impossible enough anyway. And the receptionist was great, actually. She was super nice. She didn't act like I was being pushy to have come in anyway, or weird that calling just isn't an option for me. She took my name and email down, and she told me that she's sorry that we couldn't just set up a meet and greet right then, but I needed to fill out some files for them first, which I'd have to get through email anyway, and then I could book online to make an appointment from then forward. And that seemed great. I felt heard. I'd given them my circumstances, which aren't some crazy demand, simply to ask to be emailed instead of called. And I was on a sticky note somewhere, additionally noting that email is my preference. But then more time passed. I got the email from Healthcare Connect about being assigned to a practitioner on January 7th, and it was mid April already. I hadn't received or been able to receive any outreach from the offices that I'd been assigned to, and I didn't know what to do because I don't want to be pushy, but I do want to see a doctor sometime within this decade. Until they prompted the start of the process, there was nothing for me to do. They wouldn't let me book the meetup in person, and I couldn't hit the button for them to send the email forms that I needed to fill out. So I was kind of in limbo. Going to the offices again, I'd just be told the same thing. There was nothing I could do there in time to get the process rolling if they didn't extend that. And I didn't want to have bad faith, but for all I knew, they had called me, ignoring my email request, because I've gotten several missed calls over the last few months who I have no idea who it was and have no way of figuring it out. So it's unfortunately not an impossibility that I was on an outreach list, they called, I didn't pick up, and then it wasn't seen as their responsibility to ever try again, so the process was in a stalemate. It doesn't help that assumption that I had that neither me nor my partner have had great medical correspondence of late either. Like, it feels like the new standard is that no news is good news, and honestly, that's ridiculous and I hate it. When I had a medical emergency years ago now, like in that time where I didn't have a doctor here living in Ontario, I had to get a lot of tests done. And because I didn't have a family doctor, it was hard getting results from the clinic that was overseeing me. And in that case, I can kind of understand them not taking more initiative because they aren't technically dedicated to the patient, me. Though it seems like a pretty big deal that I'd want to know from someone if my internal organs had been permanently damaged from the sickness that I'd endured. But even with my partner, who's been with the same office for a very long time, he got a minor surgery within the last year and it needed a follow-up test to confirm its successfulness. He supplied what he needed to and waited weeks until he went back to the lab techs themselves just to ask, like, hey, how long does it usually take to process that sort of thing? Like, have the results made it to my doctor yet so that he can contact his doctor and ask for them? And they told him that the results would have been done in about 48 hours. So he spent all that time just not knowing because doctors don't like to call anyone to confirm anything. So, with that being the seemingly new going standard, I started to worry that I was in a loop of actively being ignored to start the process at my new doctor's because I require something other than a phone call, which isn't even that weird around here specifically. I went all up and down the office's website, and if I wasn't already registered with them by name and health card, there was absolutely no contacting them myself through email or their portal, and I cannot book my own appointment before the meet and greet. I could go into the offices and ask to change my phone number to my partner's, but it still wouldn't technically push the process along. My name would just as likely go on another sticky note and get lost somewhere again. So in late April, I defaulted to the one method that I really had left. I wrote them a letter, a physical letter which I mailed by post. I included my name, health card, address, email, and supplied my partner's phone number instead, because although it wouldn't be within reach of me at all times, it at least was reliable for Wi Fi calling instead. I made sure to phrase the letter openly, like non accusatorily, like I'm pushy or entitled or I'm mad that the process had taken so long. Truly, I was worried that I'd gotten lost in the cracks and I didn't know what I could do to prompt the process along. And I made sure to mention, because it's true, that I have found all of this uncertainty distressing. Because the big thing that I want to see my doctor about is a neurodivergence assessment, because this sort of thing affects me so much. Like, I was a nervous mess for weeks. Like, I couldn't do much of anything else. All I was doing was like sitting around thinking about like how this isn't moving forward, how I don't know what to do, how I'm lost. Anyway, a few days later, they called my partner's number and I called them back immediately. I talked to a nice lady on the phone. She was apologetic that it had taken so long to get in contact with me. She said she'd reached out to my number previously, but I have no way of confirming that. We had a fairly nice chat, and she said that she'd send me an email so that I could get set up with the portal that afternoon. And then that afternoon passed, and the next day, and the next. And it is at that point that my brain is short circuiting because I don't know what the problem could possibly be other than someone in that office's incompetence. And I cannot advocate for myself in a way that would point that out without having a little fucking internal shutdown. Because that registers in my stupid brain as conflict. Or I realize that there's the possibility that they lied. In the way that someone says they'll do something within a certain time frame when they never actually intended to and would get around to it eventually. But in that case, and with my brain logic, like, why give me a false time frame in the first place? What I cannot fathom is how there is any possibility that this is anything other than negligence, because the chance of human error seems unbelievable. Like, I had the phone conversation. We were on to the next step. I was supposed to be getting an email. Metaphorically, the ball was supposed to be in my court, but it wasn't passed to me. It seemed impossible to me that they could have emailed the wrong address, because they had my email confirmed and correct several times over. Healthcare Connect had my email and passed it on directly as my preferred means of contact. I went to the offices and watched a receptionist write it correctly on a sticky note, which they have somewhere, I guess. I typed it out correctly in my letter, which the person on the phone had in front of them while we were talking, and read out loud over to me on that phone call, which I confirmed. And somehow, I was still getting radio silence and no email. I let a week pass. A stressful, doubtful week, because I didn't want to be pushy if they never actually meant they'd do it that day and needed the weekends. So in the end, I had to take the initiative to call them again. Not only is it hard for me to advocate for myself, it is painful to play dumb for the sake of niceties. But I did. I phrased everything politely, like I'm clueless and just checking in because I hadn't got that email yet. I got to talk to the same nice lady as before. She apologized again, and it seemed like she was realizing in time over the phone that something had been input incorrectly. And it felt really validating for her to say, if you don't get this email by this afternoon, absolutely call back. Like, call us back if you do not get this email, because that takes the uncertainty out of it for me. To know how my persistence will be perceived and that I will not be disliked for it. And in the end, I did finally get that email that day so I could fill out my forms. But this whole thing, like this whole fiasco, is my personal worst nightmare. I feel like I have no autonomy to advocate for myself and that I don't deserve to either. So if somebody does something that I am internally raging about and is harming me, or even that is objectively wrong, like out in public, people acting a fool, being discourteous, like my default is to just grin and bear it because addressing someone about their actions makes my nervous system freak the fuck out. I can and I will cry about it if I try to speak up. So, as much as I think I have a right to be a bit pushy because I've been in this no contact, broken telephone medical limbo, trying to get my meet and greet with a practitioner done while I also have no authority to make it happen, I don't want to make my new receptionist hate me for pointing out, how the fuck did you manage to spell my email wrong when you had it in front of you 4 times over, when you just had to hit copy paste? Like, as much as people make mistakes, the fact that that kind of clerical error added to me being delayed in receiving medical attention for so long, so many months, is not acceptable. And I specifically stated in my letter that I sent them that I am distressed and vulnerable to this sort of stuff, and it still happened because the care wasn't taken. And it doesn't help that people close to me have experienced medical hostility recently from their receptionists. My, essentially, father in law had someone that he was scheduling an appointment with for a pre surgery scan that will affect his livelihood and for the rest of his life, threatened to push it back even further when he dared to ask whether there would be any way that it could have happened sooner. It's crazy irresponsible to threaten delaying treatment, even if he was perceived as rude. But it's not like there aren't other possibilities available under that umbrella that he was trying to ask about, like going to another specialist in another town to shorten the time it would take, or being put on a wait list upon somebody else's cancellation. My best friend experienced resistance from the receptionist at a specialist that she was going to see because she asked for consultation. The receptionist gave her a blanket statement like, the doctor prescribed it that way for a reason, when obviously, yeah, but the treatment plan isn't turning out that way. So, is it a crime to expect adjustable action based on individual response? So, I was kind of terrified that I'd get off on the wrong foot at my new medical offices because then I am screwed. Like, if I feel like you hate me, I'm going to neglect taking care of myself because I'm too stressed by the prospect of that social interaction and avoid coming in to ever ask for things. The offices I'm with now, everyone I've talked to have been absolutely lovely, actually, but my ability to navigate social situations is debilitating in weird cases like this, where I don't know if I'm doing something wrong. I'm afraid to be disliked, and I can't handle conflict because asking for clarification or validation feels like conflict to me. And yes, I realize I very much need an autistic assessment. Navigating human interactions is a struggle. And I would just like to tack on to this. At its core, there is a severe lack of accommodation at the root of this whole thing. I'm lucky in that I am capable of doing phone calls. My ex partner was not. And as desperately as he needed medical assistance, that was a barrier that denied him access to help. There were a lot of things like that, from canceling subscription plans to scheduling job interviews that would have absolutely nothing to do with phone calls after the fact, that inability to make calls made him stuck in a shitty life state. It was a classic example of a system not being designed for neurodivergent people. And there are a lot of social structures that refuse to accommodate someone who cannot perform that verbal skill, but at the same time, it ignores the possibility that someone doesn't have access to a phone. As prevalent as it is in our society for everyone to have a cell phone, it's also an assumption that anyone who is in a financially compromised position can afford to, one, buy one if they don't have one already, or two, pay for a calling plan every month. Case in point, I can't afford that, or at least I feel like I can't afford that, but I also just have no reason to have one. Aside from the fact it's hard to take calls where I live anyway, nobody calls me. I don't need it in my daily life, and I'm not in a position to be spending over $30 a month on literally nothing. So if sending them that letter that I had sent them physically in the mail wasn't an option, I would have essentially been denied medical access because the structure doesn't allow for accommodations of not having phone access, not being able to make calls, or the supreme struggle I have advocating for myself in situations where I shouldn't have had to in the first place. I realize that I and people in my niche of lifestyle and neurodivergent traits are an exception to the norm. But that doesn't mean that the structures we also need to function shouldn't be capable of accommodating those exceptions when they arise. I am very glad and appreciative to be seeing my nice new practitioner, but I can't help but feel like it really shouldn't have been this hard for me to get there. I will continue to update on how my meeting with my doctor goes and my journey to get a formal neurodivergent assessment. I'm sure there will be plenty more hiccups along the way. So, thank you for watching. Bye.